Peace and blessings. This is your brother Asar Hotep with the Madhu Andela Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. And I am here once again to hit you with another jam-packed presentation, so to speak. So I welcome you all for joining me live, and I welcome you all who are not joining me live, but are rebroadcasting, so to speak, or catching the archives. So thank you all for joining me. For those who follow my channel, often, they know that, I often present at different conferences or something to that nature. So I recently spoke at the ASCAC, the 36th annual Kemetic Studies, conference for ASCAC, which was held in Brooklyn, New York at Medgar Evers College, and between April 18th and the 21st. So it's just last week. So there was a special plenary that had to deal with presenting new information on an old argument regarding the meaning of Kemet. So y'all know that for some reason, I have this preoccupation with the meaning of Kemet. But this is something that I've been studying and researching off and on for roughly 20 years. A little bit more than 20 years. It would be 21 years. It's 21 years this year. So, and as a result, I've accumulated a lot of information. I went through a lot of processes and tests. And more importantly, I've been through a lot of debates and arguments concerning this. And these debates and arguments have ranged from the average, studier, on the block, to some of the most noted Egyptologists that we can think of. And what I have found in terms of opposition to the notion that Kemet does not mean black land or black people is that everyone, and I haven't met one yet, every last one of them have done no research on the topic, and they lack the understanding of the proper methods to attack the question. And so it's a lot of emotionalism, a lot of straw man arguments, a lot of appeals to authority. I've experienced the whole gamut. And so as a result of that, and the limited time that we were able to present at the ASCAC conference, which was initially only 20 minutes, we were granted an extra 5 minutes, but my presentation was cut short 8 minutes. So we'll talk about that a little later. So as a result as we understood the limited time frame that we had to present and the breadth and the scope needed for understanding for a lay audience, since most of the majority of the ASCAC attendees are not people who are in the field of Egyptology or linguistics. So as a result of that, I decided, instead of presenting my argument, which I've already done on several occasions online, I wanted to address the methodologies and the methodological considerations that one must take in order to answer the question. And so this seems to be the knowledge that is lacking from the oppositional side. And so they just hear something different, and then they just go at it throwing arguments that they have not researched themselves. And again, it doesn't matter who it is. It could be your top Egyptologist to the average Joe Blow on the street. They all approach the subject the same way. And so everybody wants to move around what is needed to answer the question, and instead of dealing with it head on with the scientific methods that we use to answer such questions. So that's what my presentation was on, and that's what I'm about to present to you. So for the most part, it is the exact same presentation that I presented at ASCAC. I've only added something afterwards. And so when we get to that, I'll let you know that this is an addition to what was already in my slideshow for that. So peace and blessings, Jolanda, Michael, Kayla, Ramesu, Brother Kofi, TILG841, Hotep, Lessa, Delbo, Monica, Melanated Goddess, Vyasa, Brother Sean, I think I said Jarella already, maybe not. And so those are the people that I see right now in the chat. Kalina, Kalani, I should say, if I pronounced that correctly. Sean P in the building. You know, thank you all for joining, and thank you all who are listening but aren't in the chat. So I'm just going to get started. So let me switch real quick and share my screen. So I'm on two. I'm on my phone here, but I'm on my computer here because my computer is slow, and it just is. So hold on. So we're gonna go. Well, hold on. Before I even do that, let me just double check. So for y'all who are listening in the chat room, I am sharing a screen. So can you see the screen being shared? Just let me know, because once I expand this presentation, I won't be able to see the chat any longer until, saying the end. So, I know there's going to be a little time delay. So just let me know that everything is kosher, that you can see it on your end. And so, cool being, you should just see the chat room right now, and my picture paused at the moment. So Kayla says yes. Peace, Anji, Anjai. Peace, Maika. Peace, Michael. So it looks like everything's a go. So I'm going to go. Okay. So we're going to go to view. Then we're going to go to full screen mode. So I'll just give it a second to show up. Actually, right now it's just looking like a black screen. And so hopefully this will resolve itself in a timely manner. So I don't see anything at the moment. Oh, okay, there we go. So I'll give it a second on, I'll just count down 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the presentation title is Tep Haseb, the correct method in the debate on the meaning of Kemet. And let me close that. Let me turn that off. I'm sorry, I got a whole bunch of stuff on here. Let me reduce the noise, so hopefully you can hear me a little better. Okay, so this was my original presentation, Tep Haseb, the correct method in the debate on the meaning of Kemet. And so we'll just get started. And so before I move on, I want to remind everyone that Brother Sanjeti Angra, Brother Wujaru Iri Ma'at, and myself, Asarim Hotep, have joined forces like Voltron, and we have created the Shimsu Heru research team. And this is our first publication, which is a contribution to the debate on the meaning of the place name Kemet. So we were all scheduled to present. 2 out of 3 of us actually presented at the presentation, at the ASCAC conference. But again, knowing the limited time that we had and the scope of what was to be discussed, we decided to take our notes and make them into chapters and have these books ready at the ASCAC conference for those who wanted to know more. And so this is now available to the public. It was officially published on Friday, this past Friday. And so now you can go to Amazon.com, type in Shimsu Heru Research Team or a contribution to the debate on the meaning of the place named Kemet. I know it's a long title, but either way it goes, this text should show up, and it is available for purchase. So the expanded discussion on what I'm speaking on now is chapter 1 on methodological considerations for the meaning of Kemet. So there's a lot that I didn't cover that is covered in that chapter. And I have a second chapter in there on the hieroglyph, the I6 Kim hieroglyph, and its possible origin. So Wujawu on chapter 2 discusses toponymy and toponyms. And Brother Sanjeti Angra discusses the word Ramech. And so we're going to expand that, what we have in this text, and we're going to create another text with a totally different title, but it's going to deal with everything dealing with the debate on the meaning of Kemet. And so we're going to include some other articles and hopefully some other scholars who are going to contribute. So more on that. So it'll be a lot thicker book. And so this is just a prelude to that text. And so this is some of the stuff that I didn't get a chance to really put in, or it would have been too much to put in my upcoming book on the Luja, Volume 2, where I have a more complete analysis on the meaning and etymology of the place name Kemet. So just wanted to say that. Amazon.com, Shimsu Heru Research Team, a contribution to the debate on the meaning of the place name Kemet. So many of you may have seen me post this on numerous occasions, but it never hurts to remind folks of exactly what Sheikh Anta Diop said concerning his work, because there are a number of folks out there that thinks because I have come to a different conclusion than other Egyptologists and Sheikh Anta Diop, that somehow I'm going against Sheikh Anta Diop, the person. And, and then you pull up this quote and this shuts down all conversation. They never have a response because they don't read Sheikh Anta Diop. They read over it. They read what they like of Sheikh Anta Diop. They don't read the little stuff that means a great thing. So when Sheikh Anta Diop during an interview was asked what sort of preparations should young scholars make to undertake future studies in the field of, and I put Africology and African studies, Sheikh Anta Diop responded, "I would like to see above all a greater number of researchers, Afro-Americans, young Americans, and even whites. Why not? Because it's the young who are the least prejudiced. As a consequence, they are the most capable of making triumph ideas which frighten the older generation. Also, I think it will be necessary to put together polyvalent scientific teams capable of doing in-depth studies for sure. And that's what's important. It bothers me when someone takes me on my word without developing a means of verifying what I say. We must form a scientific spirit capable of seeing even the weaknesses of our own proofs, of seeing the unfinished side of our work, and of committing ourselves to completing it. You understand? Therefore, we should then have a work which could honestly stand criticism, because what we've done would have been placed on a scientific plane. And so this was from 1974. and he encouraged us, one, to challenge his arguments and don't believe what he say, verify what he say using scientific methods. And not only that, to create scientific research teams. And so there's not many African-American research teams along these lines. Everybody's trying to tackle everything individually. So this is one of the reasons why, we created this Shamsu Heru research team. And so that we could collectively tackle certain questions in the field of Africana studies. And so this sets the precedence for what we're doing. So I also showed this slide here, which is E equals mc squared. This is Einstein's special relativity equation. Now, the reason why I posted this is because everyone is familiar with this equation, which is energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. And it's really the change in energy equals, saying the change in mass times the speed of light squared. Or you can say that this equation, as the way it's written, is indicative of rest mass. But that's a whole different conversation in of itself. But that's not the point. The point is that while this looks like a simple equation, this equation is hiding a much larger series of equations. This is actually the reduction of the working out of a number of equations. So what we see in this next slide is a copy, in essence, of the left side of a chalkboard, or two chalkboards, the left chalkboard of Einstein. There's only one picture that survives of Einstein actually working on his equation, his famous E equals mc squared equation. And so it's on a chalkboard that is split in two. And so on the left side was equations, and on the right side was equations. So this is the left side. So in order to understand that, you have to understand, set theory, geometry, Lorentz transformations equations, things of that nature, kinetic energy equations. This is Blackboard 1. So on Blackboard 2, you get some more equations, here. And so it seems the E equals mc squared equation seems simple, but it's really not. It is hiding this information that we see here. And so this is important because I want to introduce the concept that historical linguistics, in essence, is mathematics. And so just like in mathematics, as the equation that you saw there, a lot of equations that you see or equalities that you see in linguistics is really hiding a number of equations, in the same way that E equals mc squared is hiding a number of equations. And so this is to put on the mind of the listener that there's a lot of work that comes into play regarding the meaning of the place name Kemet, that I just didn't come out of nowhere with it. I did a lot of equations. I did a lot of work. And so linguistics and mathematics go hand in hand in terms of its underlying concepts, because linguistics, although it has its scientific aspects, it is not science. It's more akin to mathematics. And the reason why it's not science, because you can't experiment in essence. Science, the natural sciences, takes advantage of experiment to falsify, hypotheses. With linguistics, is more so logic. And so when we talk about mathematics, mathematics is the study of anything that obeys the rules of logic using the rules of logic. And we'll have an example of what I mean a little later. And so mathematics is also the scientific study of patterns. And so when you look at equations, equations in mathematics are how are ways to solve the problem of solving the problem that you're trying to resolve in in whatever fashion. And so that's what equations are for. Equations describe the logical patterns that one would need to go through in order to solve a particular problem. And so we have to keep this in mind, because all this comes to the forefront of this issue of methodology. So as I mentioned before, in other subsequent in previous videos, is that the word Kemet means essentially wet, irrigated, damp ground, irrigable land, and more so land with an abundance of water and grass, or riparian land. And so what this equation here, Kemet equals damp ground, irrigable land, like E equals MC squared, it hides a series of other equations, in terms of matching sound laws, in terms of matching meanings. And so we, the word Kemet is composed of two morphemes, and it's a compound morpheme. So in a mathematical way, we would say that a morpheme is a compound. So phi sub x is a compound if and only if there are morphemes phi sub y and phi sub z, such that phi sub x and a series or a string of phonemes, equals or is the same or has some meaning if and only if, that's what you see here, it is composed of these morphemes here. So that phi sub y with this substring, with this string of phonemes, which has some meaning, plus another, morpheme here with some meaning. And so, this is a morpheme with some meaning, Kim, and this T is a morpheme with some meaning that we argue is a place name suffix. And so, this hides, or this essentially, is this equation plus some other equations that, we will discuss at some time in the future. But linguistics is mathematics. And so we have to be cognizant of that. So just to remind the audience that this wasn't haphazard, that this was the result of a long process of logical statements and axioms that had to be proven in several different areas. So when we talk about what we're engaged in, I like to use the term that was, not necessarily coined, but was made famous by the late Dr. Jacob H. Carruthers out of Chicago. And he's actually out of Texas, out of Galveston, near my hometown of Houston, Texas. And so this is Dr. Greg Carr. I think he's the vice president of ASCAC. And so we got to understand this notion of intellectual warfare. And so what do we mean by intellectual warfare? We're talking about, in essence, a war of ideas. And in the war of ideas, the scholars usually present these ideas in journal articles, in books, in normal articles, whatever. And they are sent to do battle with other ideas. And these ideas fight for the best theory to explain some aspect of reality. And so, ideas don't exist unto themselves. They're attached to human beings. And so these human beings, which are scholars, will will strategically attack your arguments. And so this is why we compare it to warfare. And so for those who are familiar with warfare, who study warfare or have been part of the armed services, you know that if you are going to war, that there are a few things that your enemy is going to attack. And so this slide here was taken from this other presentation talking about World War II. But this is applicable to our discussion here. So the title of the top of this is a blitzkrieg, and it's basically a an all-out attack at once on a central target. And so for those who are familiar with football, know what a blitz is. That's when everybody comes at the same time gunning for the quarterback. And so you have to watch out for the blitz. And so in modern warfare, we have airplanes, fighter planes. So, they will try to bomb particular targets. But the three, essential aspects of military warfare that has been with us for a long time, even before the advent of planes, is communications, transportations in terms of, and your military targets in terms of your bases of supplies. So these are the three areas that your enemy is going to focus on: your communications, your transportation, and other military targets in terms of your supplies. So we're talking about your weapons or your food supply. And so if we can cut off your transportation, we know you can't re-up on supplies. And so if you can't communicate, when there's changes in war, you can't strategize to defeat your opponent. So each one of these things are essential for you to be successful in war. And so just like in modern warfare, in intellectual warfare, the scholastic kind at least, your, and I put in quotes, enemy, or your opposition is going to attack primarily. The first thing that they're going to attack in terms of their scholastic blitzkrieg is your methodology and your bibliography. And so with your methodology, if your methodology is off, your conclusion is going to be off. So we have a saying in computer science: trash in, trash out. And so it is, if you deviate from the proper path to discovering the truth, your trajectory is going to be off from the get-go, which means you're going to miss your target and your conclusion is going to be wrong. And so, and part of knowing that is, what are your sources? What sources are you drawing from? So that's one of the things that they'll attack. They'll attack the way that you went about making your argument, and then they will attack your bibliography, your source material. So they're looking for whether your source material is reliable, and if they themselves went through proper methodological strategies. So for the up and coming scholar, you must be aware of this. And so you must always make sure that you're citing credible sources, and that your methodology is sound and robust and rigorous, so that when they try to disrupt your communications, meaning your what is being said, or what you're grounding your work in, whether it's particular theories or whether it's particular bibliographic works or strategies, that it could withstand scrutiny, and it could withstand the blows of your opposition trying to dismantle your argument. So just to keep this in mind. And so it shows the importance of why we have to approach this subject of the meaning and etymology of the place name Kemet in the way that we do, in the way that we are. So In science and the natural sciences, we discover truths by a process called the scientific method. And while, depending on what field of inquiry that you're involved in, the scientific method may take on various forms. But what I have in front of us is, kind of a good summary or standard in terms of what is meant by the scientific method. So the scientific method, it starts off by the asking of a question. Usually is from an observation that one is made in existence. And so it prompts one to ask a question. So then one does a background research, because you may not be the first one to observe something in nature. And so you want to see, first and foremost, has that that question you asked already been answered? If it hasn't, then you construct your own hypothesis to answer the question of why or what, regarding your question, your research question. And so the hypothesis itself is not the answer. It is your answer, for that is to be tested. It is your it's your answer that is to be tested. And so from there you test with experiments, and so you actually create a number of hypotheses, and your objective is to falsify the hypotheses. In science, you can't prove anything, and so keep this in mind. I have to remind everyone, you can never prove anything in science. Proof is of the domain of logic and mathematics, but not of science itself. So while you can't prove something is absolutely true, you can falsify hypotheses. You can shoot down when something isn't true. And so this is the basis of science in terms of testing. And so, is the procedure working? Yes or no? Depending on that, you have different steps. So if it's no, troubleshoot procedure, carefully check all steps, and retest. If yes, analyze the data and draw conclusions. Do the results align with the hypothesis? You communicate your results. If so, the results align partially or not at all with the hypothesis, you go back and construct new hypotheses. You have to go back to the drawing board and conduct some more tests, until you come to the result that, no matter what, you do, it is not aligning with what the experimental results are communicating. So we do the same thing with the meaning of Kemet. So our research question is, what is the meaning and etymology of the place name Kemet in the ancient Egyptian language? So the background check is we have to do literature review. And so in the literature review, we discovered that there's two main hypotheses, that Kemet equals Black land, and then Kemet equals Black people. But we must not forget that there's a null hypothesis, that meaning that Kemet does not mean the Black land, or Kemet does not mean the Black people. So off the bat, we have four hypotheses that we have to falsify. And so that's the nature of the essential beginnings of the process of discovering what is the etymology and meaning of the place name Kemet, our initial research question. So when I have these discussions with others, they have not gone through a particular scientific process to eliminate these hypotheses and to reduce and eliminate chance in terms of their meaning. So that's why we do the scientific process. We want to eliminate, as humanly possible, human bias in the experiments, and we also want to eliminate chance. And so this is why it has to be a systematic and rigorous process. And so in order to fight scholastically, you have to know what type of war you are in and what weapons you will need in order to win the battle. So if we are on land and we are fighting in the desert, it makes no sense to try to bring a submarine on the land to help fight in the desert war. You're using the wrong tools. You're having the wrong fight. You're in the wrong environment. And so when it comes to this issue of the meaning of Kemet, what I find with the opposition is that they're having the wrong fight. They're using the wrong tools, and they're not even in the right fight. You know, altogether, they're just totally somewhere else. And it's because they're totally somewhere else that they do not come close to answering the question. And so when it comes to the meaning of Kemet, we have to understand that it's an issue of linguistics. And what I have here says, since we are trying to understand the meaning and etymology of the word Kemet, we thus have entered the domain of linguistics and must use the tools, weapons of linguistics to answer the question, therefore to win the war. And so since the meaning, that's semantics, of the word in etymology, these are linguistic issues, you have to use linguistics to answer it. And this is important, and we'll see a little bit why. So there's this text, The Continuum Companion to Historical Linguistics, edited by Sylvia Luragi and Vit Bubenik. And there's a chapter on etymology by Dr. Thomas Christ. And he says, and I have to give a little background, he's talking about the early development of the field in the study of etymology in terms of the origins of words, starting with Socrates. And so at this point of the discussion, he's giving the difference between how modern scholars in linguistics do etymology versus Socrates in his day. So he says the big difference between Socrates' approach and modern etymology is that nowadays one tries to argue systematically in all strata, in phonology, in morphology, in semantics, in pragmatics, and also in extra-linguistically in philology and culture. One also takes into account historical developments. If one wants to be a productive and successful expert in etymology, one has to thoroughly study all the areas mentioned. And so this is important. So what is he trying to tell us here? He's trying to tell us that etymology consists of 6 fundamental areas or stratas that one must master in order to answer etymological questions. And so you have 3 linguistic ones, and then you have what he calls extra linguistic. So the linguistic ones are phonology, which is the study of sounds or phonemes, morphology, the structure of words, and then you have semantics, pragmatics, the meanings and usage of words, and then the extra linguistic aspect of this, which is philology, which is the reading of text and textual criticism. You have the study of culture. You can add sociology in there. And then the study of history. So philology, culture, and history are outside of the scope of linguistics, although philology and linguistics are related if there are texts associated with a particular people. So in the advent of, or in association with Egyptology, in the Meta-Neter script, there's definitely text. However, you know, the philology is just the reading of text. It does not allow for you to answer unto itself linguistic questions without knowledge of linguistic processes. So philology is not linguistics. So what I find is that you have a lot of people who are entering in this debate who are philologists, like our good brother, Dr. Mario Beda. He's a philologist. He studies the text. However, this alone will not bestow upon you competence to answer linguistic questions on phonology, morphology, and semantics. So it is impossible for you to simply read Egyptian text and think that you're going to be able to answer these questions without this background in linguistics. It's just impossible. And so our good brother Reggie and our good brother Dr. Mario Beatty exists outside of this linguistics. And so they will never be able to answer conclusively the meaning of Kemet because they're not competent in all of these areas which are needed to answer etymological questions. And this goes for most people. Most Egyptologists will never be able to answer this question because most Egyptologists are not competent in these areas. And so you need all 6 of these in tandem to answer these questions. And that's what I've done and with the upcoming work on the meaning of Kemet. And so further discussion informs us of the fact that, you know, etymology belongs to linguistics. So, and what are the first steps that you're going to need in order to start that process of answering etymological questions? So what Critch says here is that in the 19th to 20th century, starting with Jacob Grimm, Franz Bopp, and Erasmus Rask, the comparative method based on strict morphological, phonological, and lexical comparison was developed. The most important output of this research was the discovery of sound laws, which mediate between cognate languages, their respective older stages, and their common predecessors. This research, in turn, relies on good etymologies of words that exemplify the sound laws and the regularities of word formation. So the first thing that we have to do is a phonological and semantic comparison, and to establish the sound meaning correspondences, which develop what they quote unquote call sound laws. And so what I did at the conference is I gave an example of this process. So I wanted to use Dr. Mario Beatty's, one of his 2008, 2007 discussions on the meaning of the word chesed, which is usually defined as wretched in the ancient Egyptian language. And so in chesed is defined as weak, feeble, cowardly, humble of rank, mean of conduct, vile of enemies, speech, of enemies of speech, wretched and coward. And so the reason why, you know, a deeper understanding of this term was necessary, because early Egyptologists and even some in the modern era have tried to racialize this term and say, because it was used at a certain point in history to describe the Nubians in a particular way, that somehow it was equivalent to the word nigger, right? So the early Egyptologists tried to racialize this term. And so because there was a little bit of confusion of this term and, you know, where it originates and things of this nature, they really, you know, the early Egyptologists, because remember, most Egyptologists aren't linguists and they don't have a background in linguistics. So they try to define things using simply the ancient Egyptian language, which almost always leads us to folk etymology. So if we want to get a better understanding of this word chesed, we're going to have to step outside of the ancient Egyptian language or languages and try to find this term in related languages, and to see in living related languages, to see how it is being used and what other information can we get, you know, from that word, and to see how it is, see what it means, and then to go back and plug these meanings into the ancient Egyptian text to get a better understanding of the term. So that's what we're going to do, you know, here. So, you know, the first thing that we do, of course, is establish the sound meaning correspondences. So when I went about doing this, I went to look at the Z or the S in the ancient Egyptian language in comparison, for example, the Yoruba language. And so we can see from this that everywhere there's an S or a Z, and for those who don't know, the S sound, I think there was an original S sound that may have merged with Z, or Z may have merged with S, or Z became S in the ancient Egyptian language. So most of these forms that you see with Z, you'll find with an S in it, in the language. But I just wanted to go to the oldest ones that we have in the record in the TLA, which is the online dictionary for ancient Egyptian, which draws from a number of dictionaries. And so in the modern digitization effort of the ancient Egyptian lexicon. So we can see in what I call Chikam, which is the Egyptian language, you can see Sesimet horse or Simsim horse. And in Yoruba it's Eshin. So the S sound or grapheme corresponds with the sh sound in the Yoruba language. The M sound corresponds to N in Yoruba. And I have other more elaborate comparisons in the upcoming text. So you'll see that all of this is validated throughout the entire lexicon. So we can see she to open, and then zin to open, z to go, shishi to work, shishe to labor, to worry. And so in here, we're missing a second segment in the Yoruba language. And then zif to cut up, to slaughter, sha to cut, to wound with a knife, zewer to cut down, often to break. And so both of these are actually suffixes. So this W is actually a variation of this F. And I demonstrate this in the upcoming text. This, which we call the nasalized volar trio, is a suffix for verbs. There's also one that's a suffix for body parts as well. But so, and in Yoruba, if you see a noun with a vowel preceding the consonant, more than likely it is a noun prefix that nominalizes the verbs. So we have sha to cut, asha, a heavy spear, a javelin used to kill elephants. Oshe, a club of the god of thunder, Shango, which is a striking instrument. So we continue. So we see in Chikam, so that was in the first consonant position. That's what we were comparing, the C1 first consonant position. So now we're going to compare the last consonant position. And so that's why we chose was, or weres, or ures, fortunate, prosperous, well-being. Ashe, which is the force to make all things happen and multiply. And so this is my source here. This is Robert Ferris Thompson's Flash of the Spirit, 1984, page 18. And Abu Bukri Musalam, 1994. Forgot the title of that text, but it's all in my citations. So then we have Ajay, money. And then we have was, to batter, to strike, to break, to bruise, to lay. A reflex of that is ruin. And then you have Oshe, hurt, injury. And then Eshe, blow with the fist. Was, scepter. Ashe, scepter. Was, dominion, have dominion, power. Ashe, authority, power, law, command. So you can see that in the final position, wherever this S is, the presence of the sh sound in Yoruba is present. And so what we're missing in Yoruba is the W, or what is represented as the W in Egyptian, and the nasal volar trio. So as you can see with the sound correspondences here. And so since we have established the sound, quote unquote, laws concerning these morphemes, then we're on strong ground to suggest that the word hesi is cognate with these forms and these reflexes here. And so you have she, to offend, she, to miss, eshe, sin, she, or she, eshi, an unprecedented mistake, an accidental error, she, missed, mistaken, shishe, to misbehave, ashishe, a mistaken deed, a deed that is wide off the mark, shisho, to speak wrongly, to make a slip of the tongue. And so, so now when you see hesi, and I should note that based on my other comparisons, wherever there's an H-type sound in Egyptian, it usually corresponds to 0, or it is dropped, as we say in the Yoruba language. So hesi is oshi, wretchedness, shoshi, to be wretched. And remember that was, as we compare there, is also corresponded with these forms. And so it's no surprising that you see wasit, a miserable person, and wretch. And so we can say that these meanings here that you find in the Egyptian dictionaries have to deal fundamentally with one being off path, someone who is misguided or misdirected. Now, when we go into the text, so Dr. Beatty pulled up a first intermediate period text of Ankh Tefi of Muwala, and in his presentation, he says, on whomsoever I laid my hand, no harm could approach him, because my reasoning was so expert and my plans were so excellent. But every ignorant person, every wretch who opposed me, I retaliated against him for his deeds. So when you talk about a wretch, let's go back, you're talking about someone who's off path, misguided, misdirected, who made mistakes, who misbehaved, who done something wrongly, who offended. And so those are people who were in opposition. If I laid out a method, a successful method, or if I laid out, an excellent way to do something, an orderly way, and you go opposite of that, you are wretched because you're off path. You're being misguided. You're misbehaving. And so this is fundamentally what this term means. And so when we go in the text, you can go into Ptahhotep's text and see this lively as well. And you'll see it's the same thing. It's those who are in opposition. So it makes sense for why the term hesi is first applied to the Egyptians themselves, because they were rebelling against the state at this time. So they were opposing the state. And so that's why they were used as wretched. So these guys are off path. And so this is how etymology, the study of etymology, and there's a lot more involved in it, but this is just a quick example, helps us to get clarity by using other languages. And so now we can fully recover the meaning of hesi, using the Yoruba and other related languages, and then and get a more fuller and richer understanding of the term than what is present in the present dictionaries. And so, as I've shown in other presentations, that the word ma'at develops from a word for foot, tree branch, foot, and then road. And so to be ma'at, to do something correctly or rightly, means to be on the right road, the right path. In other words, the correct method, the correct way. So hesi is the opposite of ma'at. Hesi is to be off path, to be misguided, to be led astray. But ma'at is to be on path, the correct way of doing something. And so this has fundamental and rich associations for us. And so I stated that etymology requires a systematic analysis in 6 critical research areas: in phonology, morphology, semantics, pragmatics, philology, culture, and history. An analysis of the etymology and meaning of the word Kemet requires a scientific process called the historical comparative method. If one's analysis on Kemet doesn't include a complete analysis in all 6 areas mentioned and utilizing the historical comparative method, then one's research is hesi, weak, vile, wretched, off path, misguided, etc. It is the opposite of ma'at, the correct method, and can only lead to isfet, disorder, chaos, and wrongdoing. And so I want to imprint on your minds that there's the ma'atic way of doing things, and then there's the isfet and hesi way of doing things. And so I've presented to you what the axioms, what the standard is in terms of etymology. If someone is trying to answer this question and not engaged in all of these different areas, then it is hesi, it is isfet, it is not ma'at. And this is what I'm getting primarily from the opposition. So now we're going to do some bonus slides. So my time, as I said, was cut off by 8 minutes by Dr. Mario Beatty at the presentation. So I only got to the previous slide, this one here, the takeaway. And so that was around 17 minutes into my presentation, 17, 18 minutes. And so we were supposed to get 25 minutes. So I was cut short. And if I wasn't cut short in that last 5 minutes, I would have presented this. So I wanted to introduce to you this concept of logical proofs. So remember what I said, that linguistics is mathematics. And so unlike in science, where you can actually just experiment and change some variables and do this and this and that with, phenomena in nature, you can't really do that in linguistics. So you have to make logical arguments. So I'm giving you just one example of a logical argument. And we're going to talk about proof by contradiction. And so I want to first introduce, again, I said in mathematics, everything is rigorously proved. So proof is an issue of mathematics and logic. It is not an issue of science. So we're doing mathematics here. So once something has been proved, it cannot be refuted. In logic, statements and are logically equivalent if they have the same logical content. That is, if they have the same truth value in every model. And so I want to introduce you to this concept called logical equivalent. And so from this logical equivalent, once we set up the logical equivalence, that's what we did in the previous step when we was dealing with hesi. When we was comparing those two lexical sets, we were establishing logical equivalence. So we're going to do that again, dealing with this word Kemet. And so we have proof by contradiction. So now we get into the proof. So a proof by contradiction is a form of proof that establishes the truth or validity of a proposition by first assuming that the opposite proposition is true, and then shows that such an assumption leads to a contradiction. Right? So we're going to assume, so my argument, my proposition is that Kemet does not equal black land or black people. So for me to do the proof by contradiction, I have to assume that that the opposite of my statement is true, so that Kemet does equal black land or black people, right? So if I make that assumption and the logical steps that we go through leads to a contradiction, then I would have shown that it cannot be true, because something can't be true and false at the same time. So I've established a rigorous proof by contradiction. So we're going to do that now. So in the text, I demonstrate that Egyptian M corresponds to Chiluba M, and that there's interdialectical presence going on here. And so that Chiluba K corresponds to Chicam K, but Chiluba K also corresponds to Chicam or Egyptian R. And so what I'm arguing here is that Mer in Egyptian and Kim belong to two different language varieties, that they are equivalent, but the syllables are switched. So this is a two-consonant paradigm, and in the Kwekwe or the Kweki branch that we call this, the R, what was a K became R, and M remained M, as in Mary, but the syllables switched. So K became R, and the two consonants reversed, but it remained the same in the Kweki branch and in the Chiluba branch. And so when we have Miri, to love, to wish, we have in Chiluba, Kama, to love, to desire, to wish, to think. But in the Kikwe language, they no longer have this term. So we have in Kweki, Meru, servants, underlings. Then you have Kim, the verb, service, duty, or work, or the noun, service, duty, work, which is absent in this form, in the KM form in Chiluba. So we have Murti, the two merit goddesses, which are Uraeus snakes. Then you have in the Kikwe branch, snake, a black desert cobra. You have Mirit, which is a black cow, but Mur does not mean black. Then you have Kemet, cow, which is Ngombe, cow, beef, livestock in Chiluba. Then we have Meru, strips of cloth, bundle, bunch. Then we have Kim, black leather. And then we have Nkanda. And all of these sounds, I've done separate analysis, and all of these correspond to all of these forms here. So it means skin, hide, peel, rind, bark, crust, covering, integument or integument, a bundle of cloth done up in his skin, hence any bundle of cloth, leather, parchment, paper, book, episcopal letter, note, contract, engagement, document, register, book, right? So we know where the word Kim for book comes from. It comes from this form of leather. So with that said, we've established by means of the sound laws that K and R are equivalent in terms of value, and M and M are equivalent in the Egyptian lexicon. So these are equivalent. They are that's the equivalence that we're talking about. They have the same values in all areas here. So when we come to Egyptian, when we come to these words Mer here, we can see that the word Kemet is cognate with the word Tameri. And that, the word for bull and Black Serperium, there's a Kemian word for bull. I should put that in there. This is a temple here. And you have, the so-called, Kim word, Bitter Lakes. You have a Mer word, Lake Moraris. All of these are cognate. Mer word, a great black, quote unquote, snake. Then you have Kimi, there's a snake, it's a black desert snake. It doesn't mean that these words are built from the word for black. It's just a word for snake. And so we can look into the other languages. Most snakes are dark in color, unless they're like the bright red and tropical type. But most snakes are black. Same thing with most bulls. Doesn't mean that the word for these items are black. And so the proof by contradiction is, if Tameri doesn't equal black land or black people, then neither could Kim in terms of Egypt. And so I'm gonna let y'all review this for a second. There's this alarm going off downstairs I need to turn off, so I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Hope that wasn't too long. So yeah, so hopefully you had enough time to review this. and understand what we mean by the proof by contradiction. So again, tameri is cognate with the word kemet. There are two different words or labels for the same reality from two different dialects or languages along the Nile Valley. And so this is telling, and we go into, why this is the case in the book that I mentioned, A Contribution to the Meaning of the Debate, a contribution to the debate on the meaning of the place named Kemet. And we show other proofs by contradiction. And so tameri isn't the only cognate in the Egyptian lexicon for the word Kemet. And none of the other cognates established by the regular correspondences, the internal regular correspondences, sound meaning correspondences, mean black anything. And so you can't hold two opposing arguments to be both true at the same time. And so it's illogical to assume that Kemet means black land or black people, but tameri doesn't, or Mehet doesn't, or Idebwi, two other variations of the word Kemet that we established through the sound meaning correspondences. And so, as I stated, the word Kemet refers to a riparian land. And so this is a picture of a riparian land. And so a riparian zone or riparian area is the interface between land and a river or stream. So all of this area is what we call riparian land. And riparian land is actually the definition for Idebwi. Riparian is also the proper nomenclature for one of the 15 terrestrial biomes of the earth. Plant habitats and communities along the river margins and banks are called riparian vegetation, characterized by hydrophilic plants. Riparian land refers to terrain that is adjacent to rivers and streams and is subject to periodic or occasional flooding. That is Kemet. Kemet is known for its flooding. That's what gave it its culture, in essence, literally, was the flooding of the Nile. It's the presence of the Nile which separates the two lands, which you see here, and the vegetations and things along the river. That's what a Kemet is. That's what a tameri is, which is why you see the determinatives for irrigated land and rivers and canals associated with both tameri and Kemet. Matter of fact, when you look at the word tameri here, it has a determinative here of a plant, growing out of the arglyph, but it's kind of representative of a mound. But it has to deal with seasons. It has to deal with the flooding. And so, we get into that in the text. And so that essentially was going to be the end of my presentation. Had I had those extra minutes that were denied me at the ASCAC conference. And so what I want to do here, and I did this on Friday, but I'm going to redo it here, is address something that Brother Reggie brought up in his presentation, and that a lot of people who were in opposition to myself in terms of this Kemet thing, or just in opposition to Jean-Claude Mboli and don't know why, they're getting their leads from this, our good brother here, Dr. Obadeli Cambone. Now, Obadeli Cambone is a professor and PhD in linguistics. He's a research fellow in the language, literature, and drama section of the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. Dr. Cambone is currently editor-in-chief of the Ghana Journal of Linguistics and secretary of the African Studies Association of Africa. So he has the bona fide credentials to make linguistic arguments, even though it's primarily in literary criticism, but he does some comparative work. So it's surprising, when he feeds people like Netterneb and people from Team Osiris and Reggie this false information, which we're talking about here. So one of his, and I know this because I had conversations with him concerning this, one of his oppositions to the work of Mboli is that Mboli uses the transcriptions of Egyptologists, the transliterations, instead of the IPA phonological transcriptions for sounds in the ancient Egyptian language when using his comparisons and for reconstructing Negro Egyptian. And so while this on the surface may seem like a logical argument, it in fact is not. And it is something that is not done in practice. And so as I have written here, his essential arguments regarding Mboli Cambone argues that you cannot compare a transliteration of a dead language with phonemes from a living language. This is false. You must reconstruct, he says that you must reconstruct internally Egyptian, for example, and or the parent language first, and compare the graphemes from Egyptian to the reconstruction of the parent proto-language, which itself violates other standard practices. Because his mode is to reconstruct the parent and then apply the reconstructed phonemes to the ancient Egyptian phonemes, as if that's going to give you an accurate picture of what the actual sounds of Egyptian. You will never, ever, 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 ever recover the sounds, the exact sounds of Egyptian, because there's no way to verify it. Everything is done by deductive reasoning. You will never, ever in your life be able to recover the ancient Egyptian phonemes in terms of how exactly they sound, because you don't have any recordings, no people speaking the language. And plus it's over 3,000 years of language evolution. And so, one synchronic era, will not explain, or not be used in all eras. And so we have to use our best judgment when discussing the phonemes for the ancient Egyptian. So we're not blind in this totally, because we actually have correspondences from other language groups, using Egyptian words and things. And this helps us a little bit. Plus the internal data in terms of alternations between graphemes in the ancient Egyptian language and other things. So you would still have to have a strong background in linguistics and especially phonology to know how certain sounds behave, to understand, what was going on, and what was the probable sound in that particular situation and time period, and for which the graphs represent. And so I'm going to show using some citations, because when he first brought this to me, I asked him the question, well, let's assume that you're right. Can you provide me with several sources that have utilized what you argue is the standard method when it comes to dead languages in the past? And so there's not that many dead languages that have writing scripts in the world. But we know for a fact that Hebrew, Akkadian, South Arabian, some other languages in Semitic were used in the process of reconstructing Proto-Semitic, and they never went through this process. The same thing with Indo-European. So when you talk about Hittite, for example, that is a dead language. We only know about it through writing. And so same thing with the Assyrian, the Old Assyrian in Semitic. So it's like, where are these texts? And so you got to understand what is somebody's hypothesis versus what can actually be demonstrated and has been argued and debated in terms of process within the field itself. So of course, when I asked this question, there would, he had to all of a sudden get off the phone, and I haven't gotten those sources to this date yet. So, but I have sources in the opposite, and so, they say something different. So, for example, on this issue of having to reconstruct ancient Egyptian first is a bunch of hogwash. So, in this text by Henry Honigswald, which is his article, Internal Reconstruction in Context, in the text Historical Linguistics 2, Theory and Description in Phonology, 1974, he says the division between internal reconstruction and the so-called comparative method has certainly been overstressed. In particular, there is no good reason to insist that the former must, in execution, precede in the application of the latter. So there's no logic for why one has to do an internal reconstruction and create a proto-Egyptian before using the Egyptian or Proto-Egyptians to compare to other African languages to reconstruct Negro Egyptian. That's not done in reality. That's a hypothesis. It may be valid, but it has not been tested. And so the fact that Dr. Cambone did not recommend any work that he done means that he's never done it. And the fact that he couldn't even give me other sources means that he has no other source. He made it up. And so we go into the next text. So I already introduced this text, the Continuing Companion to Historical Linguistics. And so in this article on internal reconstruction, Brian D. Joseph says, for all the fact that internal reconstruction has been shown to be a powerful means of shedding light on the prehistory of linguistic states, might otherwise not be amendable to any further historical speculation. It has its limitations as a method. So while internal construction is powerful, it has some serious limitations that hinder it from being a method for any kind of great gains in terms of the larger historical comparative method. And so he gets into that more a little bit here. So previous to that quote, he was demonstrating a particular feature in the Greek language, where this word mele here for honey in the genitive form is it has a T after the I here. So it's melatos. And they established that by, with some other variation, some other words in the language that behave the same way, that there must have been in the past, the full form is melit, with os being a subject. So that T, that final consonant was dropped, and it only reappears when the genitive suffix is added. So let's just read it. For one thing, not all synchronic alternations have arisen by the relative clean path that forms like Greek mele show. For instance, the alternation seen in the Greek noun for name with a nominative onoma and a genitive onomatos. So remember what I said, that T in the genitive form in Greek mele, which is melatos, it seems to be present in the Greek word for name, which is onoma. And so the onoma is exactly like it is in English, name. It's the same word. So lends itself to the same sort of analysis as that given for mele, which I just said. So that one might reconstruct the nominative as onomat and segment the genitive as onomatos. That is perfectly reasonable internal reconstruction, but the comparative evidence in this case is disconfirmatory. And so by doing a comparative method, it disconfirms this hypothesis, which he says here. So remember, the comparative method is used to disconfirm hypotheses on relatedness and particular features within a language. So in this case, is disconfirmatory. Cognate forms in other languages show no sign of a T in this stem at all. neither in the nominative, as in these examples here, nor the genitive, as in these examples here. The T presumably entered the Greek paradigm in some other way other than being an inherited part of the stem, quite possibly being added to the genitive due to influence from adverbial forms in tos, for example, in ektos, except, or else analogically based on genitives or T stems. Therefore, there is no evidence for a prehistoric stage of Greek with a nominative onomot, even though that is the form that internal reconstruction will lead one to. So I'm setting up something here, and basically the next slide from this next text puts this into perspective. So from the text, this is actually a PhD dissertation, System Proto-Indo-European, the primary phoneme inventory and sound law system for Proto-Indo-European. This is a text we had to read when I was taking some courses in computer science when we're dealing with artificial intelligence and writing code for language use and translations. And so we learn linguistics and computer science because it's integral to AI. And so I belong into a field of computer science called, cognitive sciences, where you learn linguistics, where you learn psychology, sociology, computer science, and math. And so all of those work together. And so let me go back because I accidentally hit that. So for anything, this is a good text. So, a lot of those formulas you see, some of them come from here. So from the comparative point of view, the method does not prioritize internal or external reconstruction, but treats them as the two axes by means of which a single coordinate, the reconstruction, is postulated. In this sense, the occasionally emotional discussion concerning the demarcation line between internal and external reconstructions is a costly diversion of our resources. The comparative method gives no priority for internal or external comparison, but seeks an arrangement of the material that results in simultaneously true internal and external propositions in a sound and complete way, therefore valid reconstructions. And so, as stated, there's no a priori that you have to do an internal reconstruction in order to, to do the comparative method. That's not done in practice. And he actually goes into the history of how that logic even came about and how it was thoroughly dismissed, upon practice. And so, lastly, from this text here, a comparative Semitic linguistics, I read this to our good brother Cambone because it goes into opposition to what he was saying. So remember that the Semitic, we have a Proto-Semitic, and it's a standard, as one of the triumphs of the historical comparative method, along with the reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European, is the reconstruction of Proto-Semitic. And in Proto-Semitic, they use all of these old dead scripts, which we have no idea fully of what the sounds were and how they were instrumental in reconstructing Proto-Semitic. And so this is an actual textbook, a workbook on how to do historical comparative linguistics, utilizing the Semitic languages as a case study. So on page 13 of this text, he starts off, he says, for most of the ancient Semitic languages, our phonetic knowledge is based on extrapolation from the modern or the better known ancient languages on transcriptions in other languages, Punic and Latin-based transcription and Plautius's play, Cornelius, Ugaritic and Akkadian transcription, etc., or on internal evidence from morphophonemic changes, alternations in spelling, or changes over time. We'll skip this paragraph and go to the one that's highlighted. He says, fortunately for our purposes, this lack of phonetic detail is not an insurmountable or insuperable problem. Indeed, in some cases, like the retention of archaic consonantal spellings in Hebrew and Syriac, it may help us. Even without being able to specify the pronunciation of a given consonant in, say, Ugaritic, we can determine that it corresponds to a particular Proto-Semitic unit. since it occurs in corresponding positions in related words. Such a sound is said to be a reflex of the unit in the proto-language. Reflexes will normally retain features of the earlier unit they reflect. Thus, the Arabic F, which is a reflex of Proto-Semitic P, the voiceless bilabial plosive, reconstructed items assumed to be long. Well, he's talking about this star here. So when we talk about starry forms or Proto-Semitic form, he's defining it here. He says reconstructed items assumed to belong to the proto-language are marked with an asterisk. That's what you see here. So thus the Arabic F, which is a reflex of Proto-Semitic P, retains the voicelessness and labial articulation of P. In some cases, we can draw fairly detailed conclusions regarding probable pronunciation. So it's not a hindrance. It does not prevent you from doing reconstructions. All that matters, this is where the science part is. All that matters is that the sound in the dead language that is represented by a particular grapheme matches up consistently and reliably with a particular phoneme for languages that we do know what it sounds like, and we can transcribe accurately using the IPA transliteration letters. And so, you know, here's starting on page 232, you can see, because it gives you exercises throughout the text. So you're to reconstruct Proto-Semitic, these phonemes and words and things of this nature, given this basic vocabulary list going all the way to 100, and in some cases 200 worth of lexical items. So this is just a simple example to show you that this is what is happening in reality in actual reconstruction processes. Because the old Hebrew is not spoken. The Hebrew you hear today is a reconstruction. It's not ancient Hebrew. So this is ancient Hebrew is a dead language in that sense. They revitalized the language in more recent times. Ge'ez is a dead language. The old Syriac is a dead language. And so they have Ugaritic and other dead languages that are used alongside these forms, all utilized in the reconstruction process. So I can show examples in actual text for how to learn and study historical comparative linguistics, because I can do the same thing in Indo-European, and you will see Hittite, for example, and some other dead languages for which you don't have a living language to compare it with, and they're all utilized in the reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European. And so this is where demonstration beats conversation. And so when I, for example, they want to argue that Sumerian is not related to Egyptian, but none of them have done the work. And so I've been doing these comparisons between Sumerian, Bantu, and Egyptian for a number of years now. And so I can conclusively say that Sumerian is related to Egyptian, and that Sumerian actually informs us about Egyptian pronunciations and forms. And this is based off of my knowledge of Bantu relation to Egyptian and Sumerian's relationship to Bantu. And so what you see here is a twofold test. One, to show the relationship between Sumerian and Egyptian, and we can test Proto-Bantu, because part of the historical linguistic process is to test your reconstructions against living languages that were not included in your analysis for the reconstruction in the first place. So when they reconstructed Proto-Bantu, they did not include Sumerian, they did not include Egyptian. So we can prove that the reconstructions are accurate or not if they solidly correspond to such languages. So we know that Proto-Bantu goes as old as Sumerian or Egyptian. So we can go down the line here. for example, Duke, plate, Sumerian, Lug, twist. And then in Chicam, we have this prefix here, and then Proto-Bantu D and Sumerian L and D corresponds to the nasalized uvular trill. And as I show in the upcoming text, this grapheme here corresponds to a number of phonemes in internally within Egyptian, but especially with Bantu, with K, Ng, G in Bantu, and G and K in Sumerian. And so I'm showing here not only primary correspondences, but the sound change and in another form here. So, rope, this M is a prefix of abstractness. So it nominalizes verbs. And this is an old feature that was fossilized. So the root is this form, this right here, and this phoneme or grapheme here. And so we can prove it because the nasalized uvular trill also interchanges with N. And of course, this corresponds with itself. And it means to twist a rope. And so when we go Dungi, good, beautiful, in Sumerian, Dug, be good, be sweet, goodness. Raket, what is good, profitable. Ak, good, beneficial, useful. Dewey, heap. Lu, to be abundant, heap up. Reki, to flourish, to inundate. So when we talk about heap, a heap is to, compile and to grow something. And so we see the reflexes over here in Egyptian. And so here it has the I suffix, here it has a W prefix, and here for the notion of abundance has a W prefix and the I suffix or Y suffix. And the H sound, transliterated lowercase x, corresponds to the capital D or J sound. These interchange in Egyptian. And the same thing with H and this sound here, or this grapheme here. And so when we talk about Dago, house, Dag, dwelling, residence, Achayet, a room, a storeroom. And so, of course, just like as you see in these colored here, wherever this nasalized uvular trill is, it'll have a correspondence to N. And so you see the same thing here. So remember, these correspond as well. So this is the type of work that shows us that when we know the sounds in these other languages, that we can compare. All that matters is that these sounds correspond regularly and consistently, which we see here. And we continue here, and we see the same thing is predictable. So dong, speech, to teach. Do, speak, talk, say. Order. Rekewu, spells, magical creative power, with the prefixes and suffixes in to rejoice. So we're talking about a type of speech, a type of spell. And so we confirm it with its dialectical variant. To proclaim, to convey. Nach, nahu, or nachwe. Ding, to search for, to desire, to watch for. Udug, admire, observe. Aldug, to desire. Ach, God's eyes. And so the reflex here is look at, to see, behold. And I demonstrate that these sounds in Egyptian also correspond. And so it doesn't prevent us from doing comparative work. Anybody saying that these, aren't regular correspondences are just out of their minds. They have to falsify this. And so we could do the same thing with other forms. So, bano, arrow shaft, bano, bow, crossbow. And Sumerian is pana. And I show that Sumerian P also corresponds with Proto-Bantu B. And both of these correspond with Chicam, B, P, and W. And so what we discover in Egyptian is that the B sound, as well as the M as in Mary sound, when they are surrounded by vowels, will often turn into W. So you'll see doublets in the language of these words. So one has gone through the sound change of M or B to W. So this is a normal correspondence, a bow, a weapon, iwinet, a bow, a weapon. So bad, shine, babar, be white, is with a partial reduplication here. And then Uin, Heliopolis, the city of the sun. And I show that the words for sun come from words meaning to shine. And so bada, color, bada, a color term, Uwin, color, barud, split, burst open, bar, cut open, slit, win, to open, bedet, carry a child on the back, bala, to carry, uwin, to carry in procession. These are regular. So even if you can't argue, saying exactly what the phoneme is, you can tell it behaves like a labial. And that the wa sound, which we can verify through other languages which wrote Egyptian words, that this is right and exact in terms of its correlation. And so, we don't even have to have letters. We can substitute, these forms. This is taken from one of Mboli's slides where he's showing the relationship between English and French and the sound correspondences for each of these terms. So for example, we'll just take the first two for the sake of time. Father and père or pere, and in French pater. Latin is pater. So we can see in French the dropping of the intervocalic T. And then foot, and then ped in Latin. And so this is why it's quasi-mathematic, because you can assign a number to each representative. So wherever there's an English F, we expect to see a French P. And wherever there's an English TH, we expect to see a French or Latin T. In this case, in terms of father, it is dropped, but we see it actually is actually there as a low tone on the E. So we can confirm that with the word for English mother. And so you see in Latin, mater, but in French, it's a low tone on the E. And so, these things correspond. So we can come and create these formulas and show that, this would be just as representative as an IPA sound or a transliteration of grapheme. It doesn't matter. Every single time you write down a language and its phonemes or representative, these are not actual sounds. These are representative of sounds. These are abstractions, which is why we're able to do the types of comparisons we do. Because you're not comparing actual sounds. You're comparing representations of real life sounds. And all that matters is that these sounds correspond, that you can set up the quote unquote sound laws. That's all that matters. Nothing else matters. All that matters is the correspondence is set and that everything is regular. And so that is pretty much the end. I won't bog y'all down anymore because I'm about to go into some equations and things, but it's getting late. And I want to thank you all, for hanging with me this evening. And so I'm gonna reduce this this presentation real quick, and I'm gonna see. I haven't been keeping up with the chat, so I don't know what y'all have been saying in the chat. So let me. I don't know why this thing is taking its sweet time. So bear with me a second. And as I go back here and stop presenting to everyone. So we're going to come back to this one over here. So I'm back over here. So hopefully I'm going to reduce that and then go into the chat room. So of course, Netterneb's in the chat room. Nobody pays attention to him anymore. He had his opportunity to present in front of the world, but he chose not to come. That's another story in of itself. So what he does instead is that he goes on trolling people's presentations and things of this nature. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to scroll and see. So I'm just scrolling up, and all I see is Netterneb trolling as always. And so of course, Netterneb has a comprehension issue, and so he just doesn't get a lot of this stuff. So it's just no point dealing with him at this point. So he can troll all he wants, and unlike him, I provide sources for what I say, and the stuff that I say is pretty much a standard in the field. And so he's still learning, but he doesn't understand what it is he is learning. So his only resort is to troll social media and try to disrupt the chat with his nonsensical, non-established misconstructions, misconceptualizations, and misconstruing of people's arguments. But that's neither here nor there. So I'll just look for any questions. I'm scrolling back down now, so I can see that it's a lot of, again, it's mainly trolling from Netterneb. So hold on, let me see. Michael Eason asks, do you claim that people need to compare transliterations and not sounds of languages in the comparative method? What are sound laws that you're talking about? I'm not saying this is specifically dealing with dead languages, not living languages. If you have a living language, we can go and listen to people, and then we can, associate a particular phoneme or sound with an IPA representation. With a dead language, for which all we have is the writing, often writing does not actually correlate with the exact sounds. For example, when we write the plural in English, we write the suffix s. So if I like, if I say the word pleases, the word pleases, not pleases. Let's do something else. For example, beast, instead of beast in the singular, because the sound that ends the word beast is a voiceless plosive, the S that we have behind it has the S sound. But the actual plural in English is Z. But we write both the S sound and the Z sound with the S grapheme. So that one grapheme represents two sounds. So we can see just in this little example that the grapheme is not representative wholly of the actual sounds present in the language. And so this is what you get when you're dealing with Egyptian. But with Egyptian, you'll never be able to recover all of the sounds because you never heard the sounds. And so that's the only way that you can prove that these sounds existed. But what we can do is that we know for a fact that regardless if it doesn't represent every sound and every, that what the graphemes, the actual metanatural consonants, that they correspond consistently to other phonemes in other languages. And so we match the grapheme with the phonemes and their transliterations in the living languages. And based upon the number of languages in which you're comparison, it will give you an idea what the actual sound is in Egyptian, because sounds behave in a particular way in particular environments. And with the Egyptian, as I stated again, we're not blind. It's not like we don't know what most of these sounds are. These sounds have been verified by internal comparisons as well as external usages, because Egyptian words were borrowed by Greeks, were borrowed by Akkadians and other, groups around in these areas. And so by them trying to pronounce Egyptian words and spell them, they give us clues to what these sounds were. So that's how we know that, for example, the word is Nesubiti as far as the king, and not Sutin, as in Sarah Sutin Seti. The reason why we know that is because in the Akkadian, when they were writing to the king, they pronounced it in Sabia. And so by this time, the suffix T's had already dropped in the Egyptian language. So when they say in Sabia, it lets us know, what the sounds were and what the vowels were in between there. Because these people in these regions were multilingual and they could write in Egyptian, they know Egyptian words and things of this nature. So this helps in the pronunciation. So it's a lot of work that you have to do. It's not impossible. And so I hope this, helps to explain a little bit of what I was talking about. Exactly, at Michael Eason. Exactly. That's all that matters. All that matters is that one grapheme corresponds consistently to another phoneme in another language. That's all that matters. That's the science part of historical comparative linguistics. Reconstructions are not, it's deductive reasons based on scientific analysis, but now you're getting into the realm of theory. And so that's all that matters. And so I can, if I have time to organize all the citations, they will confirm exactly what I'm saying. And so exactly as Kamal said, no language is an island amongst themselves. And so I am because you are because, therefore I am, is the axiom that really, applies not only, of course, to African culture and spirituality, but to languages. And so we can confirm things in one language by related languages, which is why we go through that whole process of, in terms of etymology, comparing the phonology, morphology, semantics, pragmatics, and then the extra linguistic stuff, which is the philology, the history and culture. And so all of these things come together. We just don't do something in isolation. And Jean-Claude Mboli didn't do anything in isolation. He did all of this in his reconstruction of Negro Egyptian. And so let me see if there's any other questions. Yeah, you got to remind brother, he thinks that he's doing something because he plans on submitting some articles to some journals, but that's a totally different thing than actually publishing it. Like I'm going to make $1 million one day, but me saying I'm going to make $1 million is different than actually having $1 million. And I heard one of his comments from an earlier video where he talks about allegedly me not publishing in a journal. And it's interesting that neither did Diop or Rabinga. You will not find any articles of theirs where they publish any linguistic arguments in external journals. You got to remember that because they weren't being published in other journals, that Theophilo Banger created his own journal. But you can't count your own journal as being published in a journal. And so, you know, a lot of these linguistic arguments Obinga's never made in other linguistic journals. And so this has to be noted. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, but people are sometiming with their quote unquote qualifications for things that they don't put on the people that they are arguing for. Yes, no, Diop and Obinga never published in other scientific journals. Obinga started his own journal. He publishes in his own journal. And so other, you know, scholars are published in a journal, but he's the creator and editor. So of course, anything that he writes is going to be put in the journal. But you will not see his argument. For example, you will not see an Obinga argument in any linguistic journal where he argues that Kemet equals black land or black people. You won't see it. He doesn't do that. And so it doesn't take away from him. But if publishing in journals is your criterion for judging folks, then neither of them, you know, you should be citing from, because they're not publishing in other types of journals. And so so it doesn't, you know, saying count. And then he'll say something like, because I don't have a degree, quote unquote, in linguistics, that, you know, my stuff don't count. Obinga doesn't have a degree in linguistics. Neither does Shekinah Diop. Neither did Greensburg, and neither does Christopher Eric. You know, everyone else uses linguistics as a tool in their other stories. Well, Christopher Eric is a historian. His PhD is in history, but he uses linguistics as a major tool in the discovery of history. Joseph Greenberg was an anthropologist. Anthropology, you know, studies the mind and culture. And one way you access that is through the language. So he studies linguistics, and he made linguistic articles. Theophilo Obinga is a philosopher and historian. That's where he got his degrees in Greek philosophy. And I think like earlier, it was like administrative something, you know, but he does not have a PhD or a master's in linguistics. Neither does Diop. Diop took linguistic courses, but his PhD is in anthropology. He has a dual, I think, bachelor's in terms of physics, you know, and chemistry, but not linguistics. And so we got to understand that having a PhD not having a PhD does not prevent you from doing linguistics. And so it is a false criterion. All you have to know is the rules of linguistics. If you know how to do that, and you know that, you can do linguistics. It's not impossible. So let me see if there's any other questions. Michael Eason asks, then why are you being accused of comparing transliterations only? Because people don't know nothing. They just like to argue. You know, like we're just comparing I don't even know, that didn't even make sense that you're comparing transliterations only if you're using living languages. So if somebody made that argument, it's just a stupid one, because nobody just compares transliterations unless you're doing an internal comparison with Egyptian, which means you only have transliterations. And so that, if that is the case, well, that's the only compare transliterations is if you're doing an internal comparison in Egyptian. Let me see here. We creating self-defining agencies evolved. Is that the Ankh Journal online? Yes. Obinga's the founder and editor and one of the chief editors of the Ankh Online. It's a journal he founded himself. Yeah, I understand, Brother Michael. Again, our good brother, you know, he means well, and I wish him the best of luck. but he really has a comprehension issue. He doesn't comprehend very well. And so he just makes up arguments that don't exist, that nobody even argues, And so at this point, is nothing that we can do for the brother. And so we tried to help him, for a number of going on 4 years now, 4 or 5 years now on this question. And he just doesn't get it. So at this point, I just wish him luck. And, we got to move on to some other things. Yeah, of course, somebody made a statement. I looked up some of Dr. Mario Beatty's reference materials. One was J. Cherney Etymological Dictionary, which does not define Kemet as Black people. You would never find any modern dictionary that is going to define Kemet as Black people. That originates with Cheikh Anta Diop, and he never put that into, again, a scientific journal to be debated by the public. It was a self-published book that you find this in. And so, yeah, and so, and one thing you got to understand as well, that, they keep accusing me of not using Coptic, which is dumb, because I use Coptic, and you can see Coptic quoted in my text as it regards this word. One of the reasons why, first of all, we know that Kim Black and Kemet are two different words, because even in Coptic, they're pronounced differently. So Black in Coptic is either Kamom or Kame. But Kame and Kamom are not Keme, a totally different vowel set, a totally different word. So that's like, if you're arguing that these are equivalent, it's the same as saying that rot and rat are the same word, that they can be the same word or derived from the same word because they have the same consonants. The fact that even Black in Coptic and Egypt are spelled and pronounced differently should have been the major clue that they are two different words. But people like to make up associations and processes in their head as if that is the case. And so, but we would know they're different words regardless, because even in the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom, they have different sets of determinatives, different classifiers, which means they belong to different classes or categories, which more than likely means that they were pronounced differently. And so when we do the comparative analysis in other languages, they're pronounced differently. So we know that they're different words, but people like to make up arguments all the time and then just troll as if their trolling is going to somehow make this true. Kamon and Kame, Black in Coptic, is totally different from Keme in Egypt in Coptic. Totally different words, pronunciation, spellings, the whole nine. So it's illogical, and it's just a waste of time trying to rehash with some of these folks, who don't understand exactly what the argument is. So let me see if there's any more questions here. I see a lot of comments. And to Rujef M. Shemes, Seker Netcher, even if the modern dictionaries don't have Kemet equals Black people, that doesn't necessarily mean off the top that it is not the definition. And so what has to happen is that if you have a different word or a different meaning, you have to present this to the scholastic public and have this issue debated, and so that's what we're doing here now. I'm at the point where I can make certain arguments and debate them in the scholastic realm to show that the early representations of Kemet in terms of their meaning are not right and exact, that we have to look at this differently. But Diop never went through that process. He presented his case in part at the 1974 Cairo Symposium, but again, he never published in journals like that, in like Egyptology journals or Egyptology linguistic journals, to make a full argument. Neither has Obenga on this question. And so that's where I hope to be a little different than them, is to not only have, saying this work for the general public, but then I'm gonna have a more scientific work which dispenses with all of the extra stuff for the layperson so they can understand. And so I'm just dealing with raw linguistics from the get. And so that's a totally different presentation that will happen in the near future. And so let me see. Okay, yeah, they're having a whole different conversation there. So unless anyone has another question, I'm going to end this. So this is going on a little bit over 2 hours now. So I initially intended this to be an hour, but then I added that last set of slides, and so that took me I said, hold on. Michael Eason, I watched the presentations, and did Beatty give you a source that defines Kemet as Black people? No, the only source is Dr. Shekhar Diop. He's the only one. He's the initial one that and actually I should stop. Shekhar Diop was actually, he's taking the idea from some other African, it's like Susu something, I forgot the last name, but he doesn't give us any clue as to who this person is, what his background, and what methods he used to come to that conclusion. So we don't know in terms of what parts of this argument that Diop kept or rejected or anything. We just don't know. Diop just mentions his name in a footnote, and then we don't get any other details. And so it's not even Diop's original argument. But since he's the only one who tried to fully flush out an argument, we have to credit him as being the source. But he cannot give you a source outside of Diop. Again, it originates in print with Diop. Diop is the source for that argument. And so, but no standardized dictionary or anything has agreed with him and defined Kemet to mean Black people. The standard in the dictionaries is Kemet equals Black land, referencing the soil. And so based on my research, my argument is that is false too. And so both hypotheses are incorrect as evidence in my own research. Is publishing in Clyde Winter's journal considered a respectable opportunity? I'm not sure Clyde Winters has a journal, but Clyde Winters himself is not. Nobody takes Clyde Winters seriously. He says, tomorrow I will be doing a review of Diop's article in the UNESCO journal on how did the Egyptians see themselves, live on the Seshu channel on Wednesday, which is going to be, hold on one sec, April the 30th, or do we go into May? Yeah, so April the 30th, Brother Wu Jawu of the Seshi Meta-Nature group and part of the Shimsu Heru research team will do an analysis. Give me the time, Wu Jawu, so I can say it over the air. And he may not even have a particular time. You know how we do. We just, he said Wednesday, not tomorrow. So yeah, Wednesday, which is, okay, so Wednesday is actually the 1st, right? Yeah, so it's going to be May 1st, Wednesday at 9 p.m. on the Sesh Meta-Nature channel. Brother Wu Jawu is going to discuss Diop's UNESCO article on the peopling of ancient Kemet, or I think that's UNESCO is the General History of Africa, volume 2, I think, is where that particular article of Diop's is located. So since I don't have any more questions and we over the time limit, I want to thank you all for joining us. I appreciate your time. Please share, discuss, and most of all, purchase the book. Hold on, that I'm holding in my hand right here. A Contribution to the Meaning of the Place Name. A contribution to the debate on the meaning of the place name Kemet by the Seshu, to Heru research team. I'm so used to saying as the Seshu Meta-Netra group. Anyway, powerful book. It's an 8.5 by 11 text, almost 100 pages. And this is just a preliminary to the larger work, or the prelude to the larger work. So get it while it's hot, get it when it's cold, just get it. And thank you all for watching. And this Friday, we're going to continue our discussion concerning Dr. Beatty's presentation and a rebuttal to a lot of his commentary from that presentation. And we have to do it this way because there was no question and answer and there was no rebuttals during the plenary that we had at the ASCAC conference. So thank you all for joining us, and God bless you all, and good night. Peace and blessings.
see reality breaking down all my fantasies. It would be nice if I at least had one fantasy. That neutrality about to take a terabyte from the American apple pie, better get a slice. It's kinda scary the way that this life is moving on. Marvin's doing backflips inside his grave, what's going on? We have head-on collisions, not seeing another's vision. Maybe that's the reason why some colors fit the description. Lot of relationships need life rafts, sinking ships. I guess you just can't have only one like potato chips. I would love for you to listen with an open heart, but would you really even hear me if it's torn apart? I don't do the things that I